I would now like to call the May 19th, 2021 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Could we please start with a roll call?
Yes. Board member Kate Collardson.
Here.
Mary Lynn.
Present.
Adam Reed.
Here.
Jim Metcalf.
Here.
Charles Musgrave is absent today. He's traveling. Kay Volmeyer.
Here.
Staff members Lisa Knobloch.
Here.
And Annie will be joining us later. Francie Jaffe.
Here.
Tim Ellis.
Here.
Heather McIntyre is here. And then we have staff member guest Ken Hewson is here with us. He's in a meeting as well. Ben Grattan.
Here.
Jim Crick.
Here.
Dan Wolford.
Here.
And Timber Tosti.
Here.
All right. Chair, we have a quorum.
Fantastic. Then the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Does anybody like to make a motion to approve?
We'll move to approve the meetings from the last minute, or the minutes from the last meeting. Not the meetings from the last minute.
I got you. I'll second that. Any, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Aye.
That is unanimous. So the minutes are approved. So now we will move on to the public invited to be heard. We have one member from the public who would wish to speak. When it is your turn, please state your name and address for the record. You will have 3 minutes for comment, and I will time you. And please, when I interrupt, stop, or I can and will use the mute button.
Chair, first we have Doe Kelly with us.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can. Please state your name and address for the record, and then you may begin.
Okay, this is Doe Kelly of Barberry Drive in Longmont. And hello, everyone. My comments today are brief and to the point and come in the form of a couple of questions. I'm wondering if the Sustainability Advisory Board has fully been able to digest the information that came in the form of the public commentary last month that had to do with advancing technologies such as HEMS, DERs, and virtual power plants. And if so, has there been any further conversation having to do with Longmont implementing a different and more future-oriented approach to utility metering than what was already in the works with the AMI smart meters? I'm still unable to grasp exactly how it is that wireless smart meters are apparently still the #1 priority in bringing Longmont to 100% sustainable energy, and would love to understand in a completely fleshed out, in-depth report how that is going to happen. And as the health of pollinators is on today's agenda, I would also like to mention the proliferation of ambient EMF microwave radiation with our wireless devices, which include smart meters in today's society, along with numerous other factors, is helping to destroy our critical beneficial insect populations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So to try to answer at least one of those questions, I can say that we have not had any further discussion around the presentation that we received at the last board meeting. We are not allowed to communicate as a group outside of the board meetings. As far as, well, I'll say that I have read through material and feel like I have some understanding of the issues at hand. I'd like to open it up for other board members to comment if they would like to. All right. So no one has,
No,
yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Well, I do have a question. I spent a long time in the last month, many hours, meeting with engineers and technologists and trying to get up to speed on sort of the energy landscape that we're moving into. Following up on a lot of things that folks in here have brought up. I wanted, and I did submit questions to go to PRPA, but I wanted to know if we have I didn't see in our agenda that we have a time to actually discuss our accumulated questions. And I think that conversation would be relevant to what Doe is bringing up. So are we going to discuss that today? Or are we just going to send every one of the questions? I mean, I had like 15 questions myself with a lot of sub questions, and I just wonder if if we're sending 200 questions to PRPA between all of us. So are we going to have a time to discuss that together as a board?
So just really quickly, I want to jump in to clarify what my understanding was from our last meeting was that you all were going to submit questions that we would then collate and pass along to PRPA and have them answer and then bring that back to the group and then have you all decide if you wanted PRPA to come back for further discussion. So we have not received all of those questions from everybody, so we did not put that on the agenda for today for further discussion. Please feel free to correct me if I
Thank you,
misinterpreted
Lisa.
that.
I had understood we were going to bring the questions to this meeting, but it's fine. And that we were going to somehow discuss it before it went to them. But because I do think there was going to be some redundancy, and I think it would be clearer if we synthesized them down rather than giving it to PRPA. And then, they see 3 different questions that could be the same thing, but could not. And then our questions aren't answered. Anyway, I just thought that would be more efficient.
Okay. So it sounds like some folks have sent in questions though. And Lisa, was it the staff's plan to be the one or the group that's filtering and doing, so you'll plan to not send duplicate questions?
To the extent that I can pull that out, I do think Mary has a point that sometimes people might be saying the same thing and I might not be interpreting that the same way, right. But I will collate those questions and consolidate to the extent that I see that crossover. If you all want me to bring that back to the June meeting for you all to vet through those questions and then decide how or what to submit to PRPA, that's fine with me. I think that would take a good part of the meeting because that would be a lot of discussion. So it's up to you all to decide if that's what you want to do or if you want to start with the email. I thought, again, my understanding was that we would kind of start with the email approach first and then see what the response is and then go from there.
Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I just want to ask, is anyone, I know that Adam wrote a set of very fine and very considered questions. Is anyone else planning on writing questions for submission?
I've been assembling some types of questions, but they probably are not the same as yours. And before I submit them, I probably need like a Saturday to kind of read through that IEP a little bit more in detail. Unfortunately, the day job has interfered. The day job has interfered with my extracurriculars, and I just need to read all this on a weekend again to kind of update. And I wanted to watch the rest of that the meeting from last week before I did as well. So, but again, for me, my questions are probably not the same as yours.
I don't know. I ask about
because you're more of an expert in different topics than I am, is how I look at it. So yeah, but I could use another couple weeks.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to see people's questions now. I was really glad to see Adam's, and I don't think I asked any of the same questions. So if anyone wants to see the ones that I wrote, I mean, I sent them to Heather today. I would be happy with those being forwarded to everyone.
Yeah, I have a few that I'm also working on that are kind of dealing with some of the material that was sent around, and thanks Adam for sending around some of the lithium material. I've been trying to spend a little bit of more time getting a better handle on some of the material needs of PRPA's future. And but I don't have those questions formalized yet because I don't actually feel that I actually know in my head what the right numbers are to ask the questions with. So I think I'd agree a week or two would be very helpful.
So
But I'd have no problem with everybody else seeing them before we forward them on, of course.
Yeah, I'd have no problem with everybody seeing them before we move through. Even if you just did a pass before you consolidated, at least it might even be helpful if, you know, I want to say if folks do have similar questions to say, yeah, mine's the same as this, you can combine them or something, you know, maybe it makes your job easier. But I need a Saturday to sit under a tree and watch videos.
it sounds like we need a deadline. So could we
I
set a deadline for 2 weeks? Is 2 weeks
Can I
sufficient?
propose June 1st? No, too soon?
That works for me. Is any strong objections there? A week and a half out?
Let's go one more week past that.
The 8th?
So
I've got a
June
lot
1st,
going on this month. This
so
month's
June
awful.
1st is actually 2 weeks from now.
Oh, it
That's
is?
what you're
Okay.
talking
Oh,
about.
sorry.
So.
Must have been looking at the wrong calendar.
Like I said, I just need a Saturday.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, so let's go with June 1st then.
Go with June 1st.
All right. Cool.
And everyone's questions get sent out to everyone else as they come in. I think that would be helpful.
Great. Adam, yes, I saw your hand.
Yeah, great idea to have a deadline. Regarding these questions, my understanding is that they're mainly focused on PRPA's IRP. To Doe's question, are we going to discuss at all some of these technologies like DERS, HEMS, and smart meters and how that might interact with PRPA or the city of Longmont? It seems like we've drifted off a little bit into a discussion more about these questions. I'm not sure what the focus is going to be, whether it's going to be on the IRP or just this technology more generally.
I did not understand that at all. My questions are sort of general strategic planning questions.
Mine are questions about hedge funds.
Mine are about rocks. I hope that's okay.
So I think we're all from different angles. I don't think it'd be exclusive to the smart meters and such. I think each person has a different, point of view in this group, which is the great part of it. And, so I wouldn't say they're tailored to a certain direction or not. Adam, on PRPA. I anticipate Mary Lynn will have more on the meters.
No, I had one that barely touched on it. Mine is really much about the business community and autonomy and being able to contribute to the grid.
Yes, Adam.
Actually, just another follow-up point to what Mary was saying. Would we want to craft this document and down select the questions and make sure that it's as crystallized as possible? I'm sure the folks at PRPA are really busy and they'd appreciate having something that's very pointed and focused so that they can have a good opportunity to answer the questions as fully as they can.
Yeah, I think to Lisa's point, that could easily take up an entire, at least half of the meeting, and without having another meeting to do that, I don't know if you think we could, like, receiving folks' questions and then kind of editing your own accordingly is sufficient to try to crystallize what we're sending to PRPA. In my mind, I think we could do that, but I'm not sure that.
That works for me. But as I've said, Adam's questions are entirely differently focused than mine. Sounds like Kay's are going to be really differently focused. Jim's going to ask about rocks.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we're good there. think it seems like we're all going to ask different questions.
To Adam's point, I do think that that's a good one. And maybe if I could make a request, I'm happy to field all of the questions and kind of just do, you know, kind of an initial consolidation pass. But I would love if one of you would want to volunteer to do that, to help kind of crystallize or categorize better. Because I think you're right. We want to send some PRPA something that's structured and thought out so that we can make sure that we're asking them appropriate questions that use their time efficiently.
I will volunteer to do that. I'm already working with a group of technologists, and I've had to categorize and crystallize our questions down, and it was still a monster, but I'll be even more parsimonious with our questions in the final document.
Fantastic. So it sounds like we have a plan, and to Doe's question, hopefully, well, some of the questions that we're going to be asking are going to, yes, address that question, after which we'll be able to more accurately answer your question, Doe. But thank you for your comments. Okay. I think we're ready to move on to the agenda. So, the next item is agenda revisions, and I hear that we have one. You're on mute, Lisa.
Thank you. Ken Houston had requested that we move, we initially had the water conservation first on the presentation agenda, and that we just swap those around to have the pollinators presentation work first and conservation second, although I do see that Ken's on. So if you all want to go water conservation first, we can still do that, or if you want to go with the revision.
Okay.
So one item of note, Ken is on, but he is
Oh,
in
he is in
another
his
meeting on a different
perfect.
thing.
Okay,
So,
never
yeah.
mind. I was like, well, it looks like Ken's here, so maybe that doesn't matter. But so yeah, let's stick with that if you guys are good with that.
That sounds great. So the next item on the agenda is Longmont actions and approach to pollinators. We're going to hear from Jim Crick. The floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Jim Crick. I'm a project manager too in the Natural Resources Division. And so I help coordinate a lot of our field efforts on our open spaces and nature areas, and whether that's noxious weed control or wildlife management. And so I'd like to talk to you today about some of the actions that we've been taking over the years that we feel benefit pollinators. And so Heather, are you manning the slides, or can I do that?
I got you covered on them. If you want to just let me know next slide, that would be great.
Okay. So hopefully y'all had time to review the list of the complete list of the actions that we take to benefit pollinators that was included in your packet. So I'm not going to go and run through that entire list. I'm just going to highlight some of the key projects that we've been doing. So we can go ahead and get started. Heather, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So just to outline what I'll be talking about, just going over the importance of pollinators, the diversity that we have of pollinators, and then the actions that we've been taking to benefit pollinators. Next slide, please. So I'm sure we're all very well aware of how important pollinators are for our ecosystems around Longmont and in Boulder County and in Colorado. But just to reiterate some key parts, 85% of our flowering plants require animal pollination, and that's mostly by insect pollinators. 35% of our crops are animal pollinated. And also pollinators, particularly the insects, provide food indirectly, whether from the fruits and seeds that they help produce, or directly. We've got 89% of birds eat pollinators, so super, super important. So we've got a photo there. We've got our American robin feeding chicks, grubs and worms and insects from pollinators. And then that other one there is actually squash bees. They're inside the squash blossoms. So they're actually our primary pollinators of any of the squash families. So pumpkin, zucchini, your summer squash. So if you enjoy all those, thank these little guys here. And if you do grow them, if you go out early in the morning, you can kind of take a peek inside the blossoms before they bloom, and sometimes you'll find them sleeping in there. They're pretty neat. Next slide, please. So our diversity. So you can see by these numbers, we have a very, very diverse amount of different pollinators, whether that's native bees, butterflies, moths, wasps, beetles, flies, hummingbirds, you name it, we've got it in Colorado. I believe that Colorado is the 5th most diverse state in the country for native bees. And I believe Boulder County is the most diverse in Colorado. So we're pretty fortunate here to have such great diversity. It's pretty cool. And so these photos here just kind of show some of that diversity. These are photos that we've actually taken, staff has taken on some of our nature areas. So we've got a beetle, a wasp, and a skipper there. And so these are all different pollinators, even more so than what typically people think of from our bees. So, and I bring up the diversity part of this too, that's really important, is that our work group in particular, we call ourselves the ecosystem management work group, and we do just that. We manage ecosystems. So we take into account all the different wildlife that utilizes our habitats. And we really try not to focus on any one particular species, except for in really unique circumstances like threatened and endangered species. So I just want to reiterate that we focus on the ecosystem and not any particular one species when we're managing our nature areas and open spaces and parks. Next slide, please. And so threats that we have for our pollinators, and these threats are listed from the Zrixie Society. They're one of our main organizations in the country and the world, really, that help to conserve and protect insects. And so habitat loss really being number one. This is actually a Google Earth photo from a neighborhood in Southwest Longmont. You can see all the turf in this neighborhood, whether it's those little pocket parks and detention ponds, or even in people's yards. So really turf areas like these really provide almost zero benefit for our pollinators. So it's something that we're concerned about, and something that we'll talk about later with some of our policy and future actions that we're going to try to take. But you can see that habitat loss is a big deal for declining in our species of pollinators. Other problems that we have are invasive species, and really.
Sorry, you muted yourself, Jim.
I don't know how that happened, sorry. So when I talk about invasive species, I refer mostly to noxious weed species that are outcompeting our native vegetation that our pollinators depend on. And so that is another form of habitat loss, really. A lot of our native bees in particular, and native pollinators, are really specific on the plants that they depend upon. Unlike European honeybees that are pretty much a general species that can utilize a lot of different types of plants, a lot of our native pollinators, and particularly our bees, really depend on specific species. And so when we lose any of our native species of plants, that really harms our pollinators too. One of the other issues for pollinators are insecticides. I'm sure you've all heard about neonicotinoids. So that's something that the city is definitely concerned about, and we've implemented policies that we can talk about later too. And then also disease. So I did mention European honeybees. There is more and more research pointing to the likelihood that European honeybees are actually transferring diseases to our native bees. And that's a big concern for us too. And we've taken some actions to try to address that as well. Next slide, please. So some of the actions that we take, we'll start with some of the habitat stuff that we do. So I just included some photos. We've got, there on the left side, those are actually currant berries, a native flowering forb that we have around Longmont. And so we'll actually collect seeds and berries from our native plants to grow those out and propagate them so that we can restore habitat. So that middle picture there is some of our great volunteers that actually helped pot up some of the shrubs that we've grown out from seeds that we've collected. And that bottom right photo there is actually at our shop yard over on Sunset Street. We've got a shade structure there that some Eagle Scouts helped us build. And so we'll grow out those plants and eventually put those back out in our open spaces and nature areas and try to increase the flowering species out there to benefit pollinators and other wildlife that can utilize those species. Next slide, please. Some of the direct actions. So I talked about actually utilizing those plants and putting them back out. So that photo on the right there is out at Lake McIntosh, and that's kind of the next phase. You see all those pots, those are the plants that we grew out, and volunteers help them put those in the ground and increase habitat there. The photo on the left is part of our Resilient St. Vrain project, the flood mitigation and habitat restoration project on the St. Vrain through town. So we've had, these are all plugs there, all those little sprigs that are sticking out. And so we actually had, from seeds that we collected, grown out some swamp milkweed, a sunflower species, and also some other flowering species that the contractor has planted for us. And if you ever get a chance later this summer, going through town and taking a look from the trail, you'll see a lot of these flowering species actually survived really well, and we're really happy with the how that turned out. Also with these projects, we're looking to increase the amount of flowering species that are in the seed that get put in the ground. In the past, we've tended to not put so many flowering species. They're really expensive seed to put into seed mixes, but we realize how important those flowering species are. And so we've taken as an internal policy to try to increase as much flowering seed species in these seed mixes as we can afford. So that's another big change that we've been implementing over the past few years. Next slide, please. Some more habitat actions we take. So on the left, some more awesome volunteers that have been helping us do noxious weed control. This was from one of our annual events that we do, a weed poll. And this was up at Button Rock last year. You can tell by the masks. So yeah, even during COVID and the pandemic, we still got volunteers that were willing to come out and help us with some of our weed control. And then the photo on the right, some more volunteers helping us create actual bee nesting logs. And so the volunteers help drill different size holes for different types of species that nest in wood cavities. And so we'll actually stack these kind of like a firewood stack out on nature areas to provide more places for pollinators to find places to nest and reproduce. So that's a really fun project too. And you can see a great project for all ages. So hopefully we can do more of this too. Next slide, please. So moving on to some of the policy actions that we've taken, you can see there with the inset there. I believe it was in 2017 that the City Council adopted a pollinator protection resolution. And that really kind of just outlined the city's commitment to more responsibly use pesticides and insecticides and try to reduce pesticides and insecticide use by the city. And so we've really made strides with that. And that really just solidified a lot of the work that we'd already been doing, but we wanted to make sure that it was very clear that it was a commitment that the city was making. And then the background photo is another policy that we've implemented actually for many, many years now in how we mow some of our greenways. So this is, I believe this is Rough and Ready Ditch Greenway. And we've directed contractors and staff to only mow a swath along the edges of the trails and leave that vegetation that's along the ditch there and along our natural streams unmowed. So that will allow for those flowering species to have a chance to actually go to flower and provide that resource for pollinators. And if you ever get a chance to go walk around, I think you'll see some of the immediate benefits of that. We've definitely seen an increase in some of our native flowering plants along these ditches and greenways. Next slide, please. Some of the research that we've been recently involved with. I did also include in your packets a magazine article about this research that we helped fund last year. That was the second year of this research. And basically, some researchers from CU Boulder came out and they wanted to see what the effects were from the 2013 flood on pollinators. And basically, they had started actually doing surveys pre-flood just by coincidence. and happened to have some good baseline. And they found immediately after the flood that there was definitely a reduction in the amount of native bees. And they did a follow-up survey last year with some funding that we were able to provide them, and found that the native bees are actually making a comeback. So that's really good news for us, and that helps us kind of figure out if there is a problem and if that's something that we need to start addressing. Do we need to start doing more restoration work, trying to increase pollinator habitat? But it seems like some of the work that we've been doing on resilient St. Vrain, and in particular the conservation that we've done with purchasing properties along the St. Vrain for open space, has really made a difference. So that's really good news to us. Next slide, please. So just some future actions that we are looking into taking. Ben Grattan will be talking about some of the turf conversion projects that he's been working on. Eventually, we'd like to advance some of that work that he's been doing and create a strategic plan so that we can figure out exactly where we want to start turf conversions and where it makes the most sense. We also will be eventually updating a variety of planning documents, whether that's the Envision Longmont Comprehensive Plan, the Sustainability Plan, our Open Space Master Plan, our Parks and Trails Plan. We all want to update those plans to include policies that will promote pollinators in their habitat. And then also, along with CU and that research that they did, they're actually going to work with us to create a citizen science program to allow those people that can identify bees that live in our neighborhoods, that when they're out and about, they can report what they see, so we can keep track of what pollinators that we have and what species are around town, and kind of continue some of that work that CU had started. So we're really excited about that, and hopefully you hear about that coming out later this year. And with that, I believe that is everything that I wanted to talk about. And I believe I have some time for questions, or do we want to wait for questions until everybody's presentation is over?
We can ask questions now on this presentation if anybody has any, please. Jim, and Adam.
Thanks, Jim, for that. That was really interesting. And it's great to see the city being so proactive. I was just curious, when you mentioned competition from invasive species, or especially that seems to be an issue mainly for noxious weeds coming in and displacing food sources and all those things. In the city, is competition from honeybees a problem at all in the city, or is that not so much of an issue?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I forgot to bring that back up. So with the research that has been coming out showing that there is direct competition between honeybees and native bees for areas where there aren't enough pollinator resources. So on a lot of our open spaces, we still are fighting noxious weeds and are still working on restoration. So we do have some fairly limited flowering resources on some of our properties. And so we've made an effort to try to identify where we are allowing European honeybee hives to be kept on open space properties. We do allow some beekeepers to keep honeybees on properties that the city owns. And so actually this season, we asked one of our beekeepers that was keeping honeybees at Sandstone Ranch if she would be willing to move those to another property north of Union Reservoir. And she accommodated that request. And I think with the research that we found, we think that's a good move for our native bees, because the research is showing that there's direct competition and also that disease vector issue too.
Dan Wolford, I see that you have a comment.
Yeah, this is Dan Wolford. I'm the city's land program administrator. And like Jim had said, we probably have had honeybees, European honeybees on some of our open space properties for nearly 10 years now. And it was just recently that Virginia Scott, who is the entomologist from the University of Colorado Museum of Natural History, sent us some information that indicated that over a 3-month period of time, one honeybee colony can consume as much as what 100,000 native bees would consume during that 3-month period of time. So if you consider, if you had 5 of those colonies, that's nearly, they're consuming as much as that would support approximately 1 million native bees. So there is that concern. And that was one of the primary reasons why we moved those hives from riparian areas and very productive open space into more of our agricultural areas. So.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Adam, did you have a question?
Yeah, Jim, thanks a lot for the presentation. It was really great, and keep up the great work. This is awesome stuff.
Thank you.
Regarding the habitat threat, that reminded me of this species area relationship from ecology, which basically says the number of species in a given area is basically dependent on the size of the habitat. And this got me thinking, like, regarding the greenways that you're talking about, is it known, like, if those fragmented habitats are sufficient to sustain native populations here, or do you need larger swaths of land that are more connected?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and something that we always wonder too, whether it's for pollinators, for birds, or whatever it is. Do we have sufficient sized habitats? Because you're exactly right. The size of the habitat does matter for what species those habitats can accommodate. And so that's something that we're hoping with our, so I mentioned that we funded that research last year, and we were trying to formally kick off what is a small grant research program. And COVID happened, obviously, and so we had a hard time getting that out the door. So this year we've actually, I guess, really kicked off that program where we're funding typically in the amount of about $5,000 per project, small research grants, whether that's from CU, CSU, other educational institutions, or consultants, or whoever it is. And so our hope is that we can continue more research where we find needs like that to determine, do we have sufficient habitat, and gather that kind of baseline data to help answer those questions. So, excuse me. So I guess really my answer to your question is we really don't know right now, but that is something that we are hoping to try to get more research on and figure out what kind of wildlife our habitats can support.
Yeah, I guess as a follow-up, do you have any sense of how far the native bees fly from their wherever they live to pollinate? I wonder if that
you know, for the native bees, I really couldn't give you a specific answer. I'm going to say that it probably depends on the different species and what their range is. For European honeybees, I believe it's about 5 miles. So from their hive, which is pretty significant. So if you draw a 5-mile radius circle anywhere in the city, you're covering a pretty large amount of the city. So that's why we're trying to move these honeybee hives to areas that are at least as far away from some of our prime habitat as we can. But you know, it's still there's still going to be competition because the city does allow backyard apiaries and other, you know, farmers and stuff have apiaries too. So really the best, I think, solution that we can come up for that is to try to provide the best habitat that we can that can support as many native bees and pollinators and the honeybees that may be foraging in these areas too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Jim?
Well,
Yep, Mary.
My questions are really more global questions that I will ask after the presentations about what the city is doing other than on the property that the city directly owns, but helping other entities, cooperating with other entities, homeowners, businesses, and so forth to create pollinator-friendly habitat to reduce pollutions and so forth. I'm very interested in that question. And Polly had brought up in the meeting where I presented my little slideshow where I mentioned the main pesticides and toxins. She mentioned that there was a change in the offing this year at the state legislature, a ruling that would allow cities to limit the use of some of these pesticides within the city limits. And I would like to ask city employees what their, if they have any intel on that and what the opportunity might be. after all the presentations.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jim. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate your time being here and putting that together for us. That was very informative.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
So is Ken Houston, are you ready to for us to move on to water conservation?
Yes, we're available as is Francie.
We do have also Ben's presentation that's also related to the turf transition and things. So it might, just from a flow perspective, might make sense for him to go first.
Okay, that works for me. So sorry, Ken and Francie. Ben Grattan is here to speak with us about Longmont actions and approach to other Longmont actions and approaches to pollinators on the demonstration gardens and park conversions with organic practices. And Ben, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, there's a perfect segue from Mary into my presentation here. So my name is Ben. I'm a parks supervisor for the city of Longmont, obviously, and I oversee all the horticultural operations in Longmont for our parks department. And so today I was going to talk briefly about a couple of different projects that Parks is working on, and we can talk afterwards about questions on those. So Heather, next slide, please. One more. So out of Rogers Grove nature area, there was the park was actually originally built as an arboretum and outdoor learning area. And so part of that design early on was there's some gardens out there as demonstrations for the public to get ideas for their own yards, their own houses. And so in the late 90s, that park was built and built out. And the final phase of that was putting in this these gardens that showed pollinators and other types of native plants that all the residents here in Longmont could utilize. And but then I believe it was the early 2000s, there was a shift over to community gardens by the public for food production. So next slide, please. And so that whole area was actually changed over to community gardens that were managed by outside organizations. There's a company out of Boulder that was helping us manage those with all the residents. Each of them had a different plot of land on there to manage. But then 2 years ago, they decided that they were going to focus all their efforts on 2 other areas. So they actually moved away from this garden last year. And so Parks took this maintenance back over, and we had an idea of converting it back to its original idea, back to demonstration area. Next slide, please. One more. So if you aren't familiar, these gardens are actually at Rogers Grove, which is off of Hover Road, just north of Boston Avenue. And just off of the north end of that parking lot are these gardens that take up almost a half an acre of property there. Next slide, please. And so Parks is working with Northern Water up in Berthoud, and a designer from Denver Botanic Gardens who's done a lot of these projects. and we redesigned all these beds in that area. And so we'll be working with a landscape company here this summer. After council approval, this will go to council in June. And then we will start installing all these gardens. I know it's a little bit harder to read, but there's different layouts and designs of each one. There's, I think, 6 different total designs for xeriscape, pollinators, native areas, prairies, dry garden design. And so all this is meant to be public outreach for all residents and HOAs, developers, for commercial properties, to really think beyond just turf. And so I know that Jim had that nice picture of the neighborhood and all the houses, all lawns. And so this is kind of a push to really educate the public on other options other than just turf. And so on the really small picture there on the right, the bottom half is turf alternatives. And so we've actually tested out 2 of these. And so they're different types of turf that require much less water, if any at all. No fertilizers, no mowing at all. So much less input overall. And so we'll cut each of those in half, show the public how if you water and mow half of it, that's what it looks like. If you don't mow the other half of it, this is what it naturally looks like. And so it's just a really nice project with Northern Water and with that designer to help us do public outreach. Each of the plants will have little tags on them for the public to be able to see the names of them, what they are. So our hope here at Parks and this city is to really get this out to the public. That there's that Prism on the River festival there each year, so thousands of people will pass it, and so have it as kind of a really nice area for public to use and to learn. So next slide, please. This is just a more zoomed in, this is the actual design of it. There's, I think, over 1,600 plants. And so there's existing pine trees and other trees there already. And so the idea overall is to embrace pollinators, but also, so that you can have food and pollinators from early March all the way till frost, till the end of the year, and then even areas over the winter time for nesting and for wildlife to use out there. So it's a very kind of elaborate year-round design. So next slide, please. Oh, and this one will be just a strip that runs along the sidewalk edge, and it mimics tree lawn, which a lot of the new neighborhoods have. That's the area between your sidewalk and the road. It's just a narrow 5-foot strip, and so we'll be designing 2 of those as well for people to look at and be able to actually see what they look like in person. Next slide, please. All right, we'll talk briefly about organic maintenance. So Parks has partnered with a consultant, Osborne Organics and Beyond Pesticides, which is a group out of DC. And so we've done some training with them and really have been, trying to focus on how do we do organic turf maintenance, and then more broadly, how do we do, organic park maintenance overall, our beds and our planted areas. So next slide, please. And so we've really been focusing on, a reduced chemical use. Definitely, coming away from all synthetic herbicides and fertilizers. And so our focus out there now is more cultural practices in soil health, which is more sustainable in the long run. And so we've really upped our aeration and our quality of seed that we're putting out there, how sharp our blades are on the mowers, organic fertilizers, really dialed in our watering. And so we're really trying to focus on soil health and turf health overall, which helps push out weeds and pests, keep it from having to use extra chemicals on there. Just a side note, it's actually a picture of my yard last year, and so I've been testing this all on my yard as well. So this is 0 chemicals. It's all organic fertilizers, which I purchased at Lowe's. It's Rich Lawn, which is the same one we use here in our park at Roosevelt. And so, our main focus is how do we take it from my yard or 10-acre park up to 300 acres of all of our park areas. And so that's our main focus, is how do we take this much larger scale than just the one park. So next slide, please. And the last project was what Jim had mentioned about turf transitions. And so a couple areas we actually removed, we killed off the conventional lawn, your turf area, and we overseed it with a wheat grass, which is that top picture. So it actually requires half the water, no fertilizer, is typically mowed at a higher height, 4 inches or higher. And so if you want to actually take a look at it, this area, the service center off of Sherman Street, it actually looks good this year. We actually put it in at the end of July last year. So it's almost a year in, and it's looking really nice. Of course, all this rain has helped us. And so we're gonna keep working with all the parks and all natural resources staff. We're gonna try to really come up with a actual program of how do we coordinate all these efforts. And then the last thing to mention is done a lot of work with Conservancy on a resource central, these garden boxes. So I actually have 6 of them in my yard, and so we put 3 of them out in the city 2 years ago now, and so we're testing those out and trying to have those as a public outreach as well, to really start helping people visualize what these actually look like, to have at their houses. So I think that's all I had on my slides. Yep. So just a couple projects that we're working on, and hope they work out nice. Questions?
Thanks so much for that great presentation, Ben. That was excellent. Board, any questions? Mary?
Beautiful projects, Ben. I really love, I'm crazy for gardening designs. I always want to zoom in and see what you have for species and all of the little colored circles. There are so many gardening groups and permaculture groups and in Longmont, and I'm curious to know what your outreach is, and Can I email you some of our groups, because we're always looking for places to go visit and do some of this stuff. So I just want to ask a general question about the nature of your outreach.
Currently, not much at all yet. So we're, Francie and I, Timber, we're all trying to get these projects established and then do a really big outreach and say, come look, come help, come enjoy. And so I want to really try to figure out, okay, if we start putting in a lot more of these gardens out there, it is a lot more, labor than just mowing. So it's a much different maintenance, especially the weed management portion of it, pulling weeds to start off with till that all fills in. And so getting, public's help as our next piece of this is how do we get gardening groups or CSU extension, to help us. And so that's the next project after we get all this put in and do a little outreach.
Well, I'm very interested in getting to the point where this city of Longmont, nobody is using the perfluoroalkyls, dicamba, any of the, the neonics, especially within the city limits. But, it's easier public relations is always more successful when you start with a yes, which is let's do this, rather than a you can't, which is a no. So I think that is absolutely the most important thing that we can do. But I wanted to know if the city has set any legislative priorities, as I discussed earlier, or any ordinance priorities for kind of easing the public out of using a lot of this stuff.
That I wouldn't know. Timber or Dan or Francie?
I can't speak to ordinances or legislative items that are, I know at the beginning of next year, we'll begin the water efficiency master plan update in 2024. So that's when city council or within the sustainability plan and vision plan updates, there's opportunities there. But I also want to highlight that during my presentation, I'll talk a lot about our current program. So Ben Parks does a lot of internal, and then I do some of the external. So I'll give an update on that during some of my presentation.
Thank you. And I'm assuming that you're including it with water because obviously a lot of this stuff ends up in riparian areas and the watershed. The bad stuff. Okay, thank you.
Adam.
Hey, Ben, great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Just a quick question about the Rogers Grove project. Are you going to be advertising that at the or before the Rhythm on the River event so that you can get more people aware of it?
Definitely, yes. That was part of Northern Water's donation, or their agreement with us and funding. Part of it was public access, to large events, all the different, people who visit that park, and since it's such a high visited area, yeah, there's definitely once it's in, unfortunately there's no, I don't believe we're having that event this year, but hopefully this next year it'll be up and running, and that program will be on again. And definitely have an outreach, social media stuff in our in the monthly mailers to let the public know that's out there. So yep, once it's in, we'll do the outreach of it.
I just have to say really quickly about the outreach, HOAs. If you can get HOAs, even one HOA, to change its mentality, because all of the neighborhoods without them are competing with them because they make everything look so pretty, and it's really hard to break through that mentality.
So I've actually had probably half a dozen HOAs asking me on this exact topic the last couple of years. And so, they all see the cost of their water, up and up and up every year, and they want to, eliminate turf. And so this is what actually pushed this whole project was, how do we, design a garden in areas, as kind of, here's what you can do in your HOA or your yards, and it's not just weeds, and it's not, just turf areas.
Great.
So, yep.
Polly, did you have a question? No. Okay. Anybody else have a question for Ben? Okay. Thanks again. Again, great presentation, and we appreciate hearing from you. And now we will move over to the water topic. It sounds like Francie is going to be presenting. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I'll be presenting with Ken Hewson. I'm Francie Jaffe, the Water Conservation and Sustainability Specialist. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start with an update on our metered water usage over the past 2 years, hand it to Ken for a water supply update, and then he'll send it back to me for a water conservation update. I also just, after answering your question, Mary, I had realized that I think you were talking about proclamations more related to pesticides, so that actually probably would be more of a Dan Wolford question. So I probably won't talk about that. I will talk about HOAs, outreach, and all of that, but just wanted to, if you still had that question, give the opportunity at the end of my presentation for Dan to follow up as well.
I would like to hear from Dan on that. Thank you.
Great. So next slide. So this is our annual metered water consumption by our different customer classes. You can see those at the bottom since 2007. So we use metered water consumption to help track our goals to our reducing metered overall water consumption by 10%. That was set in 2004. In the past, if we look at the past 5-year average, if we're comparing from 2007, it's about a 6% if we're actually comparing from 2002, which I don't have graphed because the data doesn't get, so between 2002 and 2007, we didn't have all households metered, so it isn't as accurate, but that's looking about an 8% reduction. So we are on track. I do want to note, you can see that jump from 2019 to 2020 on the side, and that just highlights how much weather impacts water usage in Longmont. If you all remember, 2019, we got lots and lots and lots of rain. I don't think people started turning on their sprinkler systems till late July, which is very unusual. 2020, very dry. You can clearly see the jump in water usage, but it wasn't as high as 2012, which was our last drought, and our population has increased since that time. So 2021 will be another interesting year because we are again expecting dry soils. We have been getting some early moisture, but we'll see the impacts of dry soils and how this year looks on our water usage in Longmont. Go to the next slide. So this is gross per capita per day. We take our plant effluent, so water that's coming out of our water treatment plant, remove lines usage divided by our service population. So that's the Longmont's population with an estimation of how many residents we serve outside of Longmont. It's like 200 households. It's not very much. So you can overall see since 2007, we do have a large decrease in our gross per capita per day. Again, you see that jump up in 2020, but again, it's still much lower. Actually, that's where you can really see 2012 was again our last drought year at 176. So you can see that even with our growing population, that increase in water usage, we still had a lower gross per capita per day. So I'll highlight at the end of the presentation a number of our water conservation programs that we are promoting to continue to decrease water usage, but I'm going to now hand it over to Ken to talk about our water supply this year.
Thank you, Francie. Next slide will start us into our discussion on the city's water supply projections for this year. Again, thank you for allowing me on your board today. Again, my name's Ken Houston. I'm the Water Resources Manager for the City of Longmont, and excited to kind of talk to you about this. This actually talk would have been a lot more interesting a couple months ago when we were just kind of starting to come out of the drought. Luckily, we've had a lot of rain and snow. March and April were very good for our water supply. And so it's not nearly as interesting because we have done much better, which the next slide shows that currently the city has for 2021 a water supply to projected water demand ratio of 147%. And that's really how we look at our water supply. What we do is the city has always looked out 3 years. So when we set our water, any water restrictions or any drought levels, it's not only the current year you're in, but it is also the following 2 years. So a very conservative process that we follow. So really the summary is 147% supply for 2021. The Snowpack stream flow and storage in the St. Vrain are all near average, or actually now getting slightly above average. And our projections for total water supply in the next 2 years, in 2022 and 2023, are both average and above all of our trigger points for an increased drought action level. So the next slide kind of describes our drought response planning. And basically, Longmont defines a drought as anytime we have below average stream flow that, due to its severity, stresses the ability of the city's water supply to meet demands. And that's a tiny bit different than other people would think about drought. Generally, people say, well, if it's less than average, you're in a drought. If it's more than average, you're in a wet period. But really, for Longmont, what we look at pretty closely is what is it doing to our water supply? So as such, we have really 4 levels of drought response. And these were worked out, in collaboration with Water Board a number of years ago. One of the things Water Board asked us to do was always maintain what we call a sustainable conservation level, that we always want to bring out that conservation message to the citizens. So anytime our supply is at 135% or above, greater, then rather than just say, hey, there's no drought, go use any water you want, we say, or we want to sustainably conserve water at all times, and we're in a sustainable conservation level. And then level 1 drought response is 120 to 135, level 2 is 105 to 120, and level 3 is less than 105, 105%, which really becomes critical. So the next slide will show our current level of drought, which is a sustainable conservation level. At that level, we're continuing to put out public information about water conservation and the effect of all of our use. The city always asks for a 10% reduction in city water use. We're always looking at our parks, and we're always looking at our city facilities, trying to make sure we use water as wisely as we can. The city also has a program where we occasionally declare a surplus water and then lease out water to area farmers and the agricultural community. Because of the recent drought, we did not declare a surplus water declaration this year. Essentially, any water that we don't use this year stays in storage, so that's good. While we do have an above average snowpack right now, we are concerned, of course, about soil moisture. And even though we have an above average snowpack, that won't, that will be probably, we estimate about 20% lower than the snowpack, will be the runoff. So that's replenishing a lot of the soil moisture. And then finally, staff continues to look at our water demands and supplies. So the next slide shows you the South Platte Basin snowpack. This is over the whole South Platte Basin. So you're talking all the way from South Park out to Julesburg. But this is the snowpack in the mountains, 116%. So we are above average, but with the low soil moisture, overall, the entire South Platte Basin will probably have a runoff approximately average. However, the next slide is a little bit better news for us. This is the Snotel site at Wild Basin, which is up on the North St. Vrain above Longmont. This is our primary drinking water supply area. We're sitting at 148% of average. And that's really good news. You can really see on that graph what March and April did for us, especially even early in May. We didn't have any huge events in May, but it just kept kicking the snow up. And at a time when we'd normally be dropping snowpack, we were actually gaining snowpack. So that's really good. Kind of the bad news is the next slide, which is the Colorado River snowpack. We're sitting at about 75% on the Colorado River. That's really a result of the lack of the March and April snow. You can see it's been melting out on the west slope as it would this time of year, but it's been melting out. We just didn't get the benefits of these later snow events over there. So the next slide will show you our actual water storage. We're about 40,000 of 60,000 acre feet, which is about average. It's a little bit lower than average, but currently a lot of the reservoirs, actually in the last couple of weeks, this is the end of April data. So the last couple of weeks, we've actually had a couple reservoirs fill. South Platte's doing really good. The lower South Platte, the main stem is, at the end of April was 93% full and currently is almost entirely full. So that's really good. The next slide, next section I'd like to go into is the Colorado River update. As you remember, that Colorado River Snotel wasn't real good at 75%, and actually as you go west, it's even worse. So the next slide will give you just a little bit of the data on the Colorado River, and many of you may have been hearing on the news about some of the Colorado River issues and what's going on there. Almost the entirety of the Colorado River watershed is in a very severe drought. The storage in Lake Powell and Lake Mead are not historically low, but almost historically low. 35% in Lake Powell and 38% in Lake Mead. So that's getting right down to where you're going to start seeing some water delivery actions taken. And you may have also heard that the USBR is projecting that they will declare a shortage declaration. Now that scared a lot of people, but that does not affect the upper basin states, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico. It really affects the lower basin states. It starts ratcheting down the delivery of water out of Lake Mead and actually out of the Central Arizona Project, which pumps out of Colorado River above Lake Mead. But deliveries in the lower basin are being affected because they're even drier down there. And then finally, the result of those droughts were the wildfires that we experienced last fall in the upper Colorado River watershed. So the next slide shows you that very scenario that we're talking about. This is the drought map for the entire United States. You can see Western Colorado and the whole lower Colorado River Basin are in a fairly severe drought, although the next slide will highlight the Colorado, or the, excuse me, Colorado. And you can see the, you know, it's good to have a really good water supply. It's almost better to be lucky. And you can tell we're a little lucky in northern Colorado. We've got a much better drought monitor index. The entire area that you can see from Longmont to Fort Collins has no drought at all. And that entire yellow area just in the last few days has also come out of a drought declaration. So the one area in Colorado that doesn't have a drought declaration is the up northern South Platte area. And that's good news for us. But we still have to be cognizant of approximately 1/3 of our water supply comes from the Colorado River through the CBT system, and that system is still in a drought and impacted. Next slide, I'd like to introduce the wildfire impacts, and that will impact us. It isn't currently impacting us. If you look at the next slide, you'll see the 3 major fires that occurred last fall, actually starting in August on the Cameron Peak. The northern fire footprint is the Cameron Peak fire. It burnt largest wildfire in the history of Colorado, recent history. It burned almost down into it burned into the Big Thompson River Valley. On the west side, that large area there is the East Troublesome Fire, and that burnt not only the west slope, a large portion of the Colorado Big Thompson drainage area, but also unbelievably jumped the Continental Divide and burnt into the Big Thompson drainage in the Moraine Park area. And then the southern fire, the small one down by Boulder, is the Calwood fire. Again, it was the biggest recent fire in Boulder County. That burnt primarily in the left-hand drainage, but a little bit in the St. Vrain drainage. The west side of that burnt the St. Vrain drainage. Luckily for Longmont, the area outlined in light blue is the North St. Vrain Creek drainage. So that's where we get 2/3 of our water supply. It's our primary drinking water supply. It was not affected by any of the fires. The little blue X is where Button Rock Dam and Ralph Price Reservoir is. So kind of put it all into perspective. But it was pretty scary. The Calwood fire was only 1.5 miles away from the North St. Vrain drainage. The East Troublesome fire, if you look at that part that was on the very far east of it, it burnt within 3 miles of Estes Cone. And Estes Cone, the south side of Estes Cone, drains into the North St. Vrain drainage. And then the Calwood fire, the Cameron Peak fire, by burning into the Big Thompson River, was only 10 or 12 miles away from us. So all 3 of those fires burnt way closer than is comfortable. We are working with Boulder County and the U.S. Forest Service on some of the fire recovery efforts in the Calwood fire. We hope not to have impacts, but there will be some water quality impacts in Longmont this summer when we get big rain events on that Calwood fire scar. If it happens in the central gulch area, it'll come down the South St. Vrain, which will be the St. Vrain, and some of that will come into Longmont through the St. Vrain. And the biggest impact will be on the Gear Canyon area, which is Heil Ranch, open space. That all drains into the left-hand creek, which will, come through Longmont on the Southmore Park area. And so there will be some ash runoff impacts over time, but there's a lot of efforts going on fire recovery. The next slide will introduce one more recent event that happened that you probably saw in the newspapers was St. Vrain Creek fuel spill that occurred in Apple Valley. And the next slide shows you the actual truck that crashed. It was just as it was getting through Apple Valley, ready to head up the canyon. You can see the truck, the actual tanker, gas tanker on the, luckily it was on the non-river side of the road. And so most of the fuel spill went into the bower ditch. Unfortunately, it went down the bower ditch. And then there was a culvert fairly close that dropped some of that water into the creek. You can see some of the efforts there of the local fire department, and very shortly the EPA and the state highway department's hazardous materials teams showed up and did a great job at trying to contain as much as it can. In fact, the next slide will show you one of the booms they put in the North St. Vrain Creek to collect some of that spilled fuel. So the next slide gives you a little bit of the details on that. There was about 1,200 gallons that escaped, that spilled out of the truck. Somewhere between 500 and 1,000 gallons actually made it to the creek. Within a week, within 3 days, though, the EPA rapid response team was taking samples. Early on, there was a lot of concern about it, some mixture in the water column, but they took samples and said there was no residual fuel. There is still some residual fuel on the creek banks that's being cleaned up. But I would like to report the good thing is that there was no impact to Longmont's drinking water supply. At the time, we were only pulling water out of Longmont Dam, which was located well above this, off in the Button Rock Preserve area. And so there was no impacts, and we are not anticipating any impacts. It did flush on through, and we did take some samples for a number of days to make sure that it wasn't coming into any of our facilities. We did have one of the ditches was pulling the Oligarchy ditch, which goes through Longmont, fills Lake McIntosh, goes through Longmont, irrigates a number of city parks, and fills Union Reservoir. We did have the head gate of that shut off for a couple of days to make sure that nothing passed on and got into that area. So luckily we're doing pretty good at that. So let me jump back on the next slide, back to our water supply and drought management plan and our recommendation to City Council. So we went forward to City Council, and the next slide shows what we call Table A. This is kind of our data point. This is really what we use to set the conservation levels. And three columns on the right, the green ones, show the water supply in 21, 2022, and 2023. And it's 147%, 139%, and 135%. And that assumes that the drought will reoccur in 2022 and 2023 and minimizes our available water supply from those. So that's why those numbers go down, but they're still within the 135%. So that was our recommendation in council. Council did set a sustainable water conservation level for 2021 for this summer. And we're excited to have a lot of snow. If you look lately up in the mountains, there's a really good snowpack still up there. It will actually be a little ironic that because of so much of the storage this year has been filled, you're actually going to see a little bit more runoff come through Longmont, which is a good thing. It helps flush through the St. Vrain Greenway and helps aquatic environment all the way through town, and that water will be coming through. So we'll have some pretty good runoff for the next 2 to 3, maybe as much as 4 weeks through Longmont. So if any of you like to kayak, go visit our new kayak course at Dickens Park. It'll be really, really good this year. So I'll go ahead and go to the next slide and turn it back over to Francie, and she can give you a little more information about our water conservation program. And then when she's done, we'll both be here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Ken. So I'm gonna, over the next couple of slides, give an update on how we did last year, how we're doing this year so far. And then we're also starting to develop some new opportunities for next year. So next slide. So this is an overview of all of our programs. So I probably won't run through all the details there just because there's a lot of different programs, but we have two primary partnerships, one Resource Central and then one with Efficiency Works. So Resource Central, we've been launching the Garden in a Box program. This is a great program because not only does it help save water, but it also helps create pollinator habitat. These are primarily low water using pollinator gardens. As you can see, we usually sell a $25 discount. 175 discounts were sold, but actually more than that, 260 for gardens were sold in Longmont. And that's a common thing in Longmont, that more gardens are sold than the amount of incentives that we provide. We also work with them to provide waterwise seminars, and then the slow the flow irrigation assessment, where we had 134 residential and 8 large properties. I believe that was, it was actually our second highest year for the webinar participation. And on the next slide, I'll highlight, we actually saw even more people this year. So even with going virtual, which is the first year, we saw lots of participation in these seminars. We also do partnerships through the Sustainable Business Program. So they work with PACE, which is the Boulder County group. And then Efficiency Works was our new opportunity last year. We moved our toilet rebate over to Efficiency Works. We also launched a residential irrigation rebate, as well as kicked off commercial opportunities. Last year, we did not see a lot of participation, I'm guessing for a number of reasons. One, we got much stricter with our requirements to receive a toilet rebate. Colorado is a WaterSense state, so any toilet you purchase in Colorado has to meet WaterSense standards. So we didn't want to rebate toilets that you could just, that's what everything you're buying at the store. So we went stricter. It was also the pandemic, I'm sure, and especially our commercial projects, because we couldn't, our contractor that we work with, Efficiency Works, couldn't go into the buildings, couldn't talk to businesses. I bolded in blue all our partnerships with parks. So I believe, talked to the board last year about, we received a Northern Water grant to transition 1.25 acres. I almost took out the before and after the labels because you probably can't tell the difference, but that after photo is a wheatgrass blend that's expected to use 50% less water. So we really wanted to trial a turf that might look like Kentucky bluegrass, maybe for areas where people want that look, but would use a lot less water, reduce maintenance costs, which is also large. So over time, we're going to not only monitor the impact on water, but impact on maintenance costs. And also if we're mowing less, are we reducing our greenhouse gas emissions that comes from lawnmowers? We also did an indoor fixture upgrade pilot with the St. Vrain Valley School District, as we have this partnership with Efficiency Works now for commercial, industrial, and school districts. So we want to eventually over time build a case study so it can help incentivize more larger projects to participate in indoor upgrades. So next. So here's where we are so far. We've the Garden in a Box program and the Waterwise seminars are complete. You can see we had 176 attendees in 2021. We also launched an income qualified Garden in a Box program. So our CARES, that's the Longmont City rebate program. Those who participate in that program could now receive an 80% discount. As I highlighted in the previous previous slide, we were seeing much greater participation over the amount of discounts we were providing. So we actually contacted CARES participants about both exploring different options, and there was a great interest in those who wanted to receive a garden but could not afford a garden. So we've so far sold 52. We do have some budget and we're going to try again at the fall sale to use. I think we have about a budget for about 5 more gardens. So I'm excited with how this program is doing so well. And we actually decreased the number of normal $25 discounts so we could invest more in this income qualified program. We're about to launch Slow the Flow. That program doesn't start till June, so no updates on that. With Efficiency Works, I believe this is end of April numbers, so I do not have kind of the first half of May yet, but we've already seen that we've rebated the number of toilets that we did for the entire year, so already seeing an increase. And our irrigation, I expect. We don't start promoting the irrigation rebates until about right now in May, so I expect those numbers to increase, as well as commercial. Last year, actually, we launched our first, we have the Neighborhood Group Leaders Association, and part of that is the Neighborhood Leadership Series that targets both HOAs and neighborhood groups. Last year, we had our first one focused on landscape transitions. We are working with Wayne, who runs that group, to try to build a sustainable landscape series so that every year we have 2 to 3 focused not just on water conservation, but the first one this year was actually focused on stormwater management. We partnered with our stormwater staff to do that. So we're going to try to build out kind of continued education. The second one this year will be in August, and it will be all case studies that really highlight, okay, how do you do this? How much does it cost? What does it look like? We're going to partner with Northern Water because they've been running their grant program to and have a number of examples that we can build off of. Ben mentioned the Rogers Grove demonstration garden. That will also help increase education. We are working on an overall water conservation outreach plan to kind of revamp and increase. So I'm planning to, in that communications with our comms staff, have a lot of conversations about how can we highlight what our parks team is doing and our open space team, because they are doing such great projects. And then lastly, the sugar mill is a big development area. We are partnering with planning to specifically have some funding in that RFP to explore innovative stormwater, water conservation, sustainable land management opportunities on that development. So that is a piece that will be part of that RFP that's in progress. So next. And then some developing items that are coming up, the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District. So there we have Northern Water Conservancy District and St. Vrain Left Hand, each provide about 50% of the water to the city of Longmont. Last year, they passed a mill levy that is increasing funding. So they actually, because a lot of their customers are in Longmont, we are partnering directly with them to propose some projects for them to directly support projects in Longmont. So we are looking at expanding funding for neighborhood projects. So increasing funding opportunities that HOAs can tap into, because a lot of these landscape transitions are pretty expensive. They have a high upfront cost, as well as I put a flyer for the Sustainability Opportunities Lifestyle and Leadership Program. This is a lot of kind of volunteer technicians helping their neighbors, helping them get connected to a number of sustainability items. It launched last year. And so this would specifically support increasing water conservation opportunities. And then lastly, again, we want to try to target our income those in Longmont who are lower income, so that because what we've learned is that toilets, if you need to buy a new toilet and then also pay for a plumber, that can be a high upfront cost. So also exploring, can we fully cover the cost for those who qualify for them for us to pay the cost of a plumber installing toilets. And then I know Jim mentioned the street turf transition plan. So kind of exploring that for the city. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to begin the water efficiency master plan update at the beginning of next year. It will probably be a big focus of 2023, but we wanted to start, we don't need to have it completed till 2024, but we wanted to start next year, especially because this is going to probably be a larger update than normal. The climate action recommendations report last year had a specific recommendation focused on water conservation, with proposing a more ambitious goal for saving water for the city of Longmont. So staff had recommended to City Council that in our next water efficiency master plan update, not only would we look at updating based on our current goals, but that we would do an analysis of what would it look like to do different water efficiency goals for the city and then bring that back for city council. So we want to give plenty of time to work that in. So that's kind of big items that are upcoming for next year. We will know in July about the St. Vrain Left-Hand Water Conservancy District. So I'll probably just have an informational item update to the board later this year to let you all know about if kind of updates as that funding and then as that goes through city council, as well as that we'll also need to go to city council to gain approval if their board is interested in providing and supporting those programs. So with that, I just would like to ask if there's any questions for myself or Ken.
Thanks so much for the great presentation, Francie and Ken. Really appreciate it. Board, I am going to open it up for questions. However, we have 22 minutes left and a few items left on the agenda. So let's try to keep questions concise. Adam, I saw your hand, and Jim, I saw yours as well.
Great. Yeah, Francie, Ken, wonderful talks. 2 questions. The first question is regarding a plot, Francie, that you showed. It was the per capita water consumption in Longmont. It looked like the average was somewhere around 150 gallons. In my understanding that the average for Americans is something like 80 gallons. And so I'm wondering why there's roughly a factor of 2 larger consumption in Longmont.
So gross per capita can be calculated in many different ways. So it could, I haven't heard, 80 sounds very low. I believe Fort Collins' goal is 135. I think they're like 137 right now. So 80 to me sounds very low. I haven't looked at those national numbers, but it all is very dependent on how you calculate it. But I saw Ken unmuted as well.
Yeah, and if I could add a little bit there, probably the number you heard was the residential per capita use. That's basically taking the water used by residential use and divided it by your population. Gross per capita takes all of the water used in the city, divides it by your population. So an example is if you have a city, so really that varies from city to city depending on how much non-residential use there is of water. And so anything that's less than 100, you can almost bet that's just residential use, not gross per capita use.
Great, very helpful. Second question is about water rights. How are they allocated? Are they allocated based on the supply, or can they be over-allocated such that the sum of all the water rights could exceed the supply?
Really, water rights are allocated by first in time, first in right. So your water rights are based upon whenever you originally filed for a water right. And in this area, over the summer periods, usually the call on the rivers 1870 or older. So basically any water right that's 1870 or older is in priority. Luckily, when Longmont annexes property, it requires dedication to the city of the historical water rights on the land. And a lot of the land immediately around Longmont has some of the oldest water rights in the basin. So Longmont does enjoy some very, very senior water rights because of that. And but you're only allocated water based upon, you have to put it to beneficial use. So any ditch, any user that gets does get water, it has to be only for beneficial use. You have to need the water, so to speak. If you don't need it, then it goes to the next junior appropriator.
I just have one, hopefully just very quick question. Of all the water that the city controls, what % of it goes through the treatment plant and then it comes out as metered water, and what % of it ends up going through the ditches and being part of agriculture and things like that?
Okay, when are you talking about just the part that goes through the ditches that Longmont's use, like on parks and stuff? Or
I'm just curious,
total
like
water?
I'm just curious, like of the water that Longmont has access to,
Okay.
right? Yeah.
So our treated water demand is approximately 18,000 acre feet a year. Our total water demand, basically, we use raw water to irrigate golf courses and parks and other uses like that. Our total water demand is about 22,000 acre feet. So that kind of gives you a scale. Most of the water is treated, but about 4,000. The basin itself, as measured at Lyons, is about 125,000 acre feet. So to kind of put it into perspective, of the water we use, about half of it or a little bit more is native basin. So of the 22,000 acre feet we use, about 10,000 acre feet or so is used by Longmont. The remaining, the majority of the water of the 125,000 acre feet in the creek, 115,000 is used by other water users. So a lot of people think Longmont uses a lot of water in the basin, but we're really a pretty minor portion of the overall water use of the St. Vrain Creek Basin.
Mary.
I'm trying to sort of close a circuit here between the different topics that we've heard about today. I would like to hear a little bit about agricultural use of water, how that's allocated, and if there's been any thought to creating preference for agricultural use for those who are farming organically or not using the pollinator endangering and, you know, watershed, water table, downstream effects endangering pesticides.
So water is still allocated based upon the prior appropriation system. And so those irrigation ditches that have the senior rights have the right to pull water. So it really doesn't even look at whether it's agricultural use or municipal use or aquatic fishery use. The use doesn't matter. It's the priority date. So you know, the state doesn't allocate based on how you use the water. It's based on the priority date.
I do want to add that Longmont does have land, the city, that we have agriculture and lease out to different farmers. And I know I was on the review team of one of the last leases, and there was a specific focus and preference given to farmers who were doing organic or sustainable practices.
Great, thanks, Francie.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Real quick, I want to give a plug for the water tour that Ken leads. If you haven't had a chance to do that yet, it's amazing. It's well worth your time at some point. Is it soon? Has it already happened?
We're hoping we'll be able to have one this year.
Okay.
We're keeping our fingers crossed. We normally have it, if we can have it, we normally have it the second Friday of September, and we'll certainly let the board know if that's set up and give you an opportunity to sign up. But you know, I don't know how. We believe September is far enough out that I think we're going to be able to. I'm real optimistic that we'll be able to do it, but let's hope. Thank you for that plug.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to second that plug and say that that tiny little adorable historic hydro facility is like something out of a Millpunk movie. It's really cute.
Love it.
I missed it. Obviously last year there wasn't one. The year before I was sick, so I missed it. So I definitely have been waiting for like 3 years to get on that tour. So if you know, if anything happens, if you can just adjust the date even to make my schedule, I'd appreciate it. No.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ken, Francie, for the great presentation. We really appreciate you being here. And we will move on to other business. Does anybody have any? If not, then we will move on to items from the staff, which starts with Dan Wolford, who is here to talk about the mosquito control program.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, board, for giving me the opportunity. We felt that this was probably a good time, as you've talked about pollinators and a variety of other items, to just give you an update on the mosquito control program. The city's been involved in mosquito control since 2003, when West Nile virus, really peaked and made its way across the country and hit Colorado. At that point in time, we probably had a variety of trap sites around the city. Heather, do you want to throw up that map for the board to see the trap sites?
Yep, give me one moment.
So as Heather is pulling that up, let me share with you, in 2018, there was a direction to reduce the mosquito control program by $20,000. So because of that, we had to obviously modify the program. That modification looked like a reduction in the number of trap sites around the city from 16 to 12. We modified and reduced our trapping schedule and moved it back 2 weeks, from June 1st to June 15th. And we reduced, or actually we increased our threshold that tells us that it's time to take some action, from 100 adult mosquitoes in those traps to 150. The other thing that with the modification in 2018 was that it was very costly to put all these notifications in the Times call. So with that, we've decided since 2018 not to do any notifications in the Times call, but do all our notifications on the city's website, as well as our vendor. And our vendor is Vector Disease Control International, who is managing a wide variety of entities up and down the Front Range, all over the United States, that particular work group. So if you jump back, Heather, can I have you jump back to that map? And we'll just look at those trap sites around the city and how this works.
Sorry, one moment.
Okay. So you have to understand that the city's mosquito control program is significantly different than many of the municipal programs, or even some of the county programs up and down the Front Range. Our focus is not with nuisance mosquitoes. It's more of a vector control. So as we are trapping these variety of sites, and this year, our first trap night will be on June 20th, Sunday, June 20th. And it goes through about a 12-week program to about the second week of September. So basically, you'll see on the map where where you see the stars within the red hatch areas, that's where we have found over time to provide representative sampling of mosquitoes throughout the city. So those locations get trapped every single Sunday night. What happens is then Vector Disease Control is grabbing those, counting those mosquitoes, sorting them out by species, and delivering that information to us by first thing Tuesday morning. So you have to understand, in sites like, if you will, the LM27, we've had numbers well over 1,200 mosquitoes in any trap night. So the technicians are sorting those, identifying the mosquito species, and letting us know. We're throughout the season, and we started basically April 15th with monitoring for wet sites throughout the city and looking and treating those wet sites that have mosquito larvae since the middle of April. We're also taking random sampling to identify those mosquitoes that are West Nile positive mosquitoes. They go to the state lab for identification. We don't do any adulticiding until we have a West Nile positive mosquito in any of the 3 county regions, including Larimer County, Weld County, and Boulder County. And I will say that typically, you know, it's that the 4th of July time when we first see that first West Nile virus mosquito pop up. And as we are counting the numbers of mosquitoes, they're typically looking for the Culex species. There's 2 Culex species, Tarsalis and Pipiens, that carry the West Nile virus. So with that, we're treating larvae in wet sites with a bacteria, an organic bacteria, BTI, with the hopes of stopping the generation of the adult mosquitoes. You know, the BTI impacts their respiration and hopefully reduces those numbers of adult mosquitoes. I would say the larviciding program is about 80% of our program. Then when we hit that that first West Nile virus mosquito that turns up as positive through any of the regions, that's when we start our adulticiding program. Last year, we didn't do our first adulticide program until nearly the end of July on the 27th. So the way that works is when those 12 sites get counted, if they exceed the threshold of 150 mosquitoes, we designate that neighborhood to be sprayed. So if you're looking at that map, what we would typically do is if you look at, if you're familiar with Sandstone Ranch, if that particular trap exceeds 150, that red hatched area will get sprayed, or the use of adulticide spray to knock down the adult mosquitoes. That will take place, again, as you recall, trapping on Sunday. We get the notification Tuesday morning. We get that up on the city's websites, as well as the Vector Disease Control's websites by late Tuesday afternoon. And then what we will be doing is spraying those particular neighborhoods that have hit that threshold on Thursday evening at approximately 9 p.m. The reason for that is really that is the most active period of time for mosquito activity. The positive thing for that is vast majority of our pollinators will be in their nests or hives or wherever, you know, for protection from that herbicide application, or it's actually a pesticide application. So that takes place on Thursday night. If for some reason we have inclement weather on Thursday night, winds exceed 10 miles an hour, we've got moisture, anything like that, we'll postpone it to the following Friday night. We run back into Sunday and we hit that program again, and we run that for basically a 12-week period. Again, the primary focus for us is really more of a vector disease control perspective rather than, and I can tell you, I've already had a couple phone calls about, you know, mosquitoes in someone's neighborhood. I can't go outside. We're not about spraying for the sake of knocking down the adult mosquitoes, but waiting until we know we have West Nile positive mosquitoes in the area. If throughout this process, we continue to see a rise in the numbers, and Boulder County is working with us on really a daily basis, but a weekly basis that help us identify the vector index. Once that vector index, it's really a percentage of mosquitoes that are infected or could be infected with West Nile. And so at the point that that vector index is at 75%, then we will consider spraying the entire city. And it's strictly due to health control issues. And we do that in collaboration with Boulder County Public Health and CDC. We haven't done a citywide spraying since 2013. So fingers crossed. I will say 2019 was a very mild year, and that within our regular routine program, vector disease control gives us approximately 250 miles of linear adulticide spraying, and last year has been the only year since 2003 that we did not exceed that mileage. We sprayed a total of 166 miles. The other aspect of the program is certainly our outreach. And one of the things that we constantly stress are the 4Ds to the community, and ask people to take some personal responsibility with West Nile virus in our control. Those 4Ds stand for the use of DEET. The D obviously falls in for DEET, but some people don't really want to use DEET. So again, it really means use a repellent of your choice. There's a variety of options out there. So again, that's the first D. The second D has to do with avoiding being outside and amongst those mosquitoes at their peak. So that second D is between dusk and dawn, knowing that if you're going to be out, take some precautions. The third D is, yeah, if you're going to do that, let's dress appropriately. So that's long sleeves and long pants. And a lot of times when you're out at your deck and you're trying to have a late afternoon or cocktail or whatever that is on your deck, and it's 95 degrees, it's tough to be outside with long sleeves and long pants. And the final D is drainage, really taking precautions around your neighborhood to eliminate standing water. If you have a bird bath, how frequently are you changing that water? If you've got a number of outdoor pots and plants, making certain that that water gets drained every other night. If you've got neighbors that, have some spare tires or, playground, a sandbox that you have buckets, just asking them to make certain that that gets, spilled. The other big, consideration would be, your own gutters after a rainstorm. Are we draining those gutters? And what does that look like? I mean, one of my, you tell me if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I deliberately drive through every puddle that I come across in the streets or our parking lots, because that standing water is just another opportunity for larvae and adulticide and adult mosquitoes. So we really, promote the 4 Ds for personal responsibility. Another aspect of the program, again, is outreach, and we, it's longmontcolorado.gov/West Nile. You can get to all these maps. Each one of those areas is individually mapped, so you can know exactly where you live and how that's happening. The postings up there, you can sign up for an email notification when your neighborhood is being sprayed. You can also call vector disease control and say, hey, I don't want you to spray. I've got maybe an organic, garden or whatever. I don't want you to spray in my house, or in front of my yard. So they will, as they come, across your property, they will shut off that misting unit. And one of the aspects of the adulticiding component, those droplets are so fine, they're the diameter of a strand of hair. And it just takes that adult mosquito to fly into that droplet to interrupt the respiratory aspect of and drop that mosquito. So again, you have the opportunity to call vector disease control and say, hey, please shut off. Please call me when I'm notified, any kind of notification. And certainly we encourage any of the citizens in Longmont, if they see standing water, see a problem, call me, call our contractor. They're happy to come out, do dip tests, see what kind of production's going on, and deal with it. So that's our, in a nutshell, that's our mosquito control program. We're 1 month into it, really looking at and monitoring for larvae. I suspect that, come June 20th will be our first trap night. And again, we modify those traps depending on locations and what we find. I could certainly, share with you the my spreadsheets from back to 2010 that every single one of these trap sites, it's really helpful for me to go back to those and see trends and what neighborhoods are doing things. I will tell you, if you are in the Great Western, the Mill Village area, I'm sorry for it. I feel sorry for you. It's just one of those areas that has a natural area to the back that doesn't drain well. And, you know, as I mentioned to you before, our threshold for spraying is 150. It wouldn't, I mean, on a regular basis, we see numbers that are 450 and they peak sometimes, like I think I said before, as many as 1,200 mosquitoes in a single trap night. So with that, I'm happy to address any questions you might have. Feel free to give me a call. If you've got any concerns or issues, I'm happy to address that with you and with the vendor.
Go, Polly.
So Dan, we now know that the guy running down the street erratically driving to hit every puddle is you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Don't mosquitoes carry other things like equine meningitis, which also kills people?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very difficult. Every year we get calls of people saying, we don't want to spray, it's killing everything. And yes, it's very difficult because I don't really want my garden sprayed with this, but I also don't want to die of West Nile or equine meningitis. So we have to balance things out. But so you're not checking on any disease except for West Nile?
That's the only thing that the state is targeting right now. So that's what we're going off of. And the other aspect of this is, before we get into the spraying component, I have the ability through the state's website, look and see who is registered beekeeper anywhere in this area. So when we see that, I, certainly at the beginning of the season, give them the city's website saying, we're starting our mosquito control program. Monitor this, and I would, strongly suggest that, those nights that if you're in those neighborhoods, to cover your hives. The important aspect is, we've been doing this since 2003. We deal with certain citizens all the time that don't like it, but on the other hand, I've got citizens that are calling me and said, why aren't you spraying more? So, like you said, Polly, it's very much a balancing act.
Yeah, it's difficult, but I appreciate all you're doing. Thank you.
If there's no other questions, thank you very much.
No, thanks for that great presentation. Really appreciate it. So Lisa, you're up next.
Really quick, I did want to circle back. I think, Mary, did you want Dan specifically to address your question from earlier in the meeting?
Well, we're over time, and there was very little information in this meeting about pesticides, and I think it's a little late in the game to address it here. I do think that we need to circle back to it because it's wonderful to hear what we're doing for pollinators, but there was nothing about that topic.
Yeah, Polly.
I did want to say something to you, Mary, because City Council hasn't been able to act on anything because of the state preemption on chemicals. We have lots of state preemptions by special interest groups. We have rent control, we have plastic stuff by the plastics industry, and we have pesticides by the chemical industry, and we have rent control by the building in Longmont. So now we are able to do something. So I hope that we'll be able to start doing something in that regard in the next year. I won't be there in 5 months, but I presume that everybody else will be on board with that. So just let them know, okay? Thanks.
So it doesn't make any sense to write a letter to that effect now?
Oh yeah, it does, because it just passed. Yeah.
Well, could you share information on what the bill is that passed that overturned the preemptions, or what bills were overturned that were causing the preemptions?
I don't know the number. You can go to the state legislature, state of Colorado legislature, and look up the bills based on what their subject matter is. You can
Okay,
search in many different ways. I
I'll
don't know
find
the
it, and
number.
I'm gonna, thank you, Polly. And I'm going to bring to the Sustainability Board that we write a letter to City Council recommending that we take specific action. And I wouldn't mind having private conversations with Dan or whoever else is, Ben, whoever else is, you know, is especially excited about this idea. So I'll be calling you or emailing you, at least, Dan.
Yeah.
If you may, I can't say that I'm excited about this opportunity, but I am excited. You know, I'm happy to address any of your concerns. I will share with you all of our open space and natural resources staff that are using herbicides are state certified, qualified supervisors and applicators. You know, much of what we are putting down is very target specific. And we have a number of general policies that these are the things we likely will never use, and some products that we've decided that, you know, we're just not going to use. But I'm happy to address any questions or concerns, or between Jim and I and Ben, all being resources for you to assist you and provide any information we can provide you.
Okay, thank you. To be continued.
Perfect.
Thanks. So just the last piece that I had is pretty quick. We were contacted by some planning folks at the county who are doing a bus rapid transit feasibility study along US 287, the stretch between Longmont and Broomfield. They're looking for, it's a study to include bus rapid transit options along that corridor to help relieve congestion. And they're looking for community input on that, and have identified this group as a group that may want to provide feedback on that. So it's just a question to you if you are interested in having somebody come to the June meeting, is what they had identified their time frame being, to talk about that study and get feedback from this group.
Can you tell us about the June agenda?
There's not much currently on there. I was going to give you all just a very preliminary update on the zero waste waste diversion work that we have underway, but that could also be moved to a future meeting. And if there's some PRPA follow-up that we want to carve out time for, we can do that as well.
Be supportive of them coming. Yeah. Yes, Mary.
I at some point this year would like to find out about the city's biosolids, biosludge program, if that's still in existence, if we're talking agenda.
Okay. Polly?
I'm very supportive of them, but I think they should also reach out to actual bus riders. But anyway, I think that's a great idea to have us contribute something to that. Thank you.
Adam?
Yeah, just following up on Councilmember Polly's point, I'm an actual bus rider and I would like to hear the presentation, especially at the board meeting. So Lisa, thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, sounds good. I'll follow up with them and get them on the June agenda.
Your baby's still cute. We finally got a face shot. The back of the head's cute too. All right. Are there other items from the board? Okay. Council. Polly, anything for us?
Oh, we're doing a lot of things. We're having a retreat in June, I believe. So if anybody wants to come, you're welcome. It's an open public meeting. There aren't any things that I can think of that I tried to answer Mary's question about that. There are things that the state legislature has passed a huge number of bills that are very positive. And so we're working on updating our inclusionary housing policy now that we've gotten rid of the Telluride decision as something that interferes with that. And the plastics, they've gotten rid of they worked on several plastics issues, including styrofoam, which is wonderful. And so once the state legislature has been able to pass some of these things, now we can do them too, because they were preempting what we could do as a municipal policy. So all those things are very positive, and I would suggest you look up stuff that's been passed and will continue to be passed until I think they're going to be around another week. The state will be operating another week down there.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, there are informational attachment items or items attached to the board packet in the form of emails. Just drawing your attention to them, please review them. And that is that. Oh yes, Polly. Oh, you're saying.
I'm sorry, I have to go. I have another meeting.
Bye. Jim, were you going to move to adjourn?
I was saying bye to Polly, but I can move to adjourn.
Okay. Anyone want to second that motion?
I'll second that.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Great meeting, everybody. Thanks
Have
so
a
much.
good one.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Aye.